So hi, hello, welcome back, and it's Maria McMahon here with you again, and today I'm going to talk about red flag number 35, and it's all about sex. And it's red flag number 35 is when sex becomes a nightmare, because it often does. When you are dealing with a narcissist, believe me, the fabulous sex is not going to last very long. So sex is one of the most important elements of a relationship, because it's the one thing that, if you think about it, differentiates it from all other relationships. And you open yourself up in a much more vulnerable way with an intimate partner than you do with other people. So when it comes to sex with a narcissist, it can very quickly become a huge turnoff. Now, this is because in the beginning, it's amazing. Usually it is. There are some narcissists with which this will not be the case, but for a lot of them, this is the case. So we're going to concentrate on that type for the moment. So you have this amazing, mind-blowing sex, or at the very least, it'll be really good enough. But as with everything in Narcland, sex is just another tool to manipulate, control, exploit, and destroy you. Now, there are lots of different scenarios that might play out when it comes to sex. So I'm going to have a look at a couple of the ins and outs, and please excuse the pun on that one, of sex with a narcissist. So they can be very generous in bed, but there's always a but. Somatic narcissists, they are very, very generous, but generally they're expert lovers, and they'll treat you to, multiple orgasms and sensual foreplay and oral sex, and you'll be in sexual heaven for a time, usually the love bombing time. But what you don't know is that this amazing sex is not about you. It's all about the narcissist's ego, because the somatic narcissist pride themselves on being sexual athletes and on the positive fuel they get when you tell them, wow, you're the best lover I've ever had. So that's one type. Now, you may also get what I call screenplay or scripted sex. So some narcissists actually have a screenplay in their head about how they want sex to be. Now, this could come from, and often does, from watching porn or from some other idealized, romanticized fantasy that they want to reenact with you. So they will tell you exactly how to position yourself, what to say, and they'll direct your performance throughout. Now, they don't care about your enjoyment or satisfaction. And when they get you into this carry on, for want of a better word, initially, you'll go along because, well, you might think it's kind of a sexy adventure, but it'll soon wear very, very thin, and you'll hate the thought of having to do this again. Now, if you complain, you'll be called selfish or a prude or some other negative comment that will make you feel really inadequate. So if that's happening to you, you want to really think about that, because you basically don't want to be doing anything that you don't want to be doing. And I always say that with everything, but it's particularly important when it comes to sex, because that's such an area of vulnerability. Now, another thing that might happen is just plain old boring sex. Now, this can usually happen if it's a vulnerable narcissist who has targeted you and you're with, or you're starting to date a vulnerable narcissist. Now, it may not have been great sex because they're typically asexual. So they are not really interested in sex at all, but they'll often rely on you to show them the sex ropes. And you might find this kind of endearing and sweet in the beginning, but before long, you'll realize that they're just bored with it and that they just don't want sex. And your efforts to get them interested will then result in you being called oversexed or a nymphomaniac or, you know, that you can't think of anything else, and them just completely withdrawing from you. So they're just not interested. But what they do then is they start to make it look like it's your fault for wanting it in the first place. Oh, you want to have sex all the time, even when that's completely unreasonable. And, you know, you may not have had sex very often at all with them, and it may be weeks, if not months, have gone by before you've tried to initiate it. They still blow it out of proportion. So you're left thinking, well, what's wrong with me? Why do I want sex all the time? So you start thinking, well, it's my fault. I shouldn't want sex. Maybe I am oversexed. And you start thinking all this nonsense. And again, this is just them manipulating. This is just them manipulating so that you fit into what they want. It's all about them. With a narcissist, it is always about what they want, never about what you want, okay? So if you think back to if you've seen the video I talked about how they love to blame, well, here's another area where they can fit right into blaming you for all of this. And what happens is you then start to feel rejected, you feel unattractive, you feel unlovable, and you'll start doing one of two things. And usually when you're dealing with a narcissist, what you'll do is you'll make do with no sex at all, because the idea of going out and cheating or finding sex somewhere else is usually not an option. And usually a narcissist takes up so much of your emotional and sometimes physical energy that you don't even think about going out and having an affair or finding sex somewhere else. So most of the time what you'll do is you'll just make do. So you'll be living a sexless life, and you will fit into the mold that the narcissist is creating for you. Now, if we come back to the, hang on, we've talked about the somatic. If we come back to the somatic, they'll usually be able to read your sexual vibe enough to match it and make you happy in the early stages. But if it's a less accomplished narcissist, they may not. They might try out their usual techniques, not realizing that not everyone has the same sexual buttons. So if you try to sort this out, to suggest this or that instead, they'll get offended and they'll blame you because, well, hey, it worked fine with my last girlfriend or with my ex-boyfriend or with whoever. It's worked with everyone else. Why doesn't it work for you? Because they can't take criticism, you see, so they'll blame you for everything. Even if their sexual vibe isn't working at all for you, they won't think, they'll just be mechanical. But then you'll get blamed if you try and, make things a bit better. It'll be your fault. It'll all be your fault. So in the same way that they blame you for everything else, it will apply the same to sex. And if they can't satisfy you, if you fail to get where you need to be, it's your fault because, well, you're probably frigid or you probably don't have whatever it takes, whatever. They'll make up some excuse to make it your fault, okay? Now, they might also use this perceived criticism of them as an excuse to withhold or refuse sex with you again. And of course, they'll blame you because you've said they're no good, even though that's not what you've said at all. But they'll use that as an excuse, particularly if it happens to be a vulnerable narcissist. Oh yeah, they'll play the victim all over that one, and they won't even bother because they're not interested in sex to start with. And you've tried, it didn't work. Now they're feeling grumpy. It's just a smokescreen. So if these types of, problems are coming up in your sex life, look beyond the smokescreen. What's going on? And look at the other flags. And are these all starting to add up to this is a narcissist? Another aspect of sex that I want to talk about on this video today is that sex becomes abusive or violent, and this isn't pleasant, but it does become abusive and violent. For a lot of women I've heard from, but it also can happen with men. It's not the case that a man can't be sexually abused, and it's a big controversial issue, but it happens. But if you've got this type of thing that's happened to you, then you want to be getting out of this relationship. This isn't a relationship you want to be in, because this is intolerable, and you shouldn't be prepared to put up with this under any circumstances. Now, another thing that can and does show up a lot with narcissists is porn addiction. It's actually quite common, and it's no big surprise, because porn particularly objectifies women, and 99% of the time when it comes to female porn, it's all about female domination and male gratification. And I'm leaving men out of this one because, aside from gay porn, which is another story, but generally porn, it's usually that it's guys watching it and it's women being objectified in it. I don't know if there's many cases of women objectifying men in porn, so I'm not even going to go there. So, but this is just something I want to bring up, because porn addiction does come up a lot in the narcissistic relationship. Now, the other thing about porn is it's very much, excuse me, it's very much devoid of emotional connection. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong in using porn to spice up your sex life if that's your thing, but if your partner is obsessively watching, either secretly or blatantly, if they're obsessively watching porn, that's also a sign that everything isn't rosy in the garden. One woman I know of reported that her husband used to watch porn, and then he would just jump on top of her to finish himself off, which is not the most romantic way in the world to have sex. And I have to laugh, but it actually is not very funny, especially not when, you're not part of the whole process, and it's just very degrading, very degrading. Now, the narcissist will often, as I said earlier, they might have an idealized and objectified idea of how sex should be, and they might want you to behave like that. They'll often expect you to behave like porn actresses, because having watched so much of it, they've come to believe that that's how women behave during sex. And studies have also shown that overexposure to porn reduces a man's ability to sustain erection, and it also desensitizes them to real sex by raising the stimulation threshold bar so high that it makes it more difficult, if not impossible, to sustain what we call normal sexual relationships. So that can come into play as well. So if you've got a lot of porn going on there and with your partner, that is a big, big red flag for you. So you want to be really careful around that one. And I've also got a note here that they might also be taking Viagra, which is also very common, to help them perform, but that can also, that can also fail. Now, another thing that happens with sex and a narcissist is orgasmic pretending, and this is one where it does affect the guys, because female narcissists can do this so easily. So they will easily fool their besotted lover because, she's better than Meg Ryan in that scene in When Harry Met Sally. If you haven't seen it, go YouTube it. It's a classic. Female narcissists are often addicted to any adrenaline rush that they can get as a means of stimulation. So they might want to dress up, talk dirty, role play, involve you in risky outdoor sexual behavior, or handcuff you to the top and bottom of the bedposts. Not uncommon. Now, such theatrics can take over, you know, inside and outside the bedroom, and you never get any more normal sex. And this kind of stuff can be fun in the right place and the right time. If both partners are consenting and want to play like this, that's fine. But it's when the balance is completely out of whack, one partner doesn't and the other partner is constantly pushing for this kind of risque or, you know, off the wall type behavior, then it becomes a problem. So if that's happening, you need to look at, you know, what else is going on in the relationship. I have to go over this one because this is probably the oldest one in the book. Also comes usually from the female narcissist, and that is, I've got a headache. Not tonight, darling, I've got a headache. Female narcissists, once they've got you under your spell, might just stop giving you sex altogether because they're not getting anything out of it. They're not getting any kicks. They're not getting any fuel, and they're finding their excitement, you know, in other ways, which bizarrely, but not when you understand narcissistic behavior, includes depriving you of sex. So they may start out by saying they've got a headache or they're too tired, they're not in the mood, and eventually they'll start calling you out. And a bit like in an earlier example, they'll call you out for having sex on the brain, or, you know, they'll call you a pervert, or, you know, that sort of talk, which is completely ridiculous, but they do it. And then you'll start thinking, well, I shouldn't be wanting sex. Or, you know, you might go and visit a sex worker, or you might go and cheat. You know, it happens. Not so much when you're involved with a narcissist, because, as I say, usually that takes up all your energy. But I do know people who've done it, and it's understandable. And of course, then the narcissist finds out, and then all hell breaks loose, and you become the most diabolical person on earth because you dare to cheat on them. Doesn't matter why. Remember, they're never wrong, and you're going to get blamed for everything. So if that's you, don't think about cheating. Instead, do yourself a huge favor and get out of the relationship, okay? So another thing that comes up that happens with sex, I said it was a big issue, or a big field, is that it can be very mechanical and soulless. So quite often, you know, if a narcissist does get down to it, and this can be how it goes with a vulnerable narcissist, they kind of get on with it and they get the job done, but it's very, very without connection, without any tenderness, without any emotion. It leaves you feeling very empty, very lonely, very used, and just longing for that, you know, powerful emotional connection that, you know, should go together when you have that physical union with another person. You know, that can be completely missing, which means it's no fun on an emotional level. And if you're looking for that, you're not going to get it. Now, another thing that comes up is that a lot of narcissists, not all of them, but a lot of them, prefer masturbation. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with masturbation per se, but the narcissist's use of it, as you'll probably guess, is not going to be a pleasant experience for you. And again, I know everything I share with you on my videos, I've had validated by people who've experienced it, by clients I've worked with, you know, people in my group, books I've read. So all of this is real stuff. I'm not making any of this up, okay? So they'll often play with themselves in front of you, but reject you if you try to get involved. And they would tell you that they'd rather do this than F you, which isn't very pleasant, whichever way you cut it. So that's like a multiple insult, multiple layers of insult when that happens. So they're lying there and doing it, which can, on so many levels, I don't even know where to start with that one, but it's not very nice if it happens. because you get rejected on all these levels. Or another thing is that they'll use you as an object to just, you know, ogle at while they get themselves off. So again, this isn't going to make for great, satisfying, great sex, is it? No, it's not. Another thing that can happen and does happen, and again, this all comes into controlling and domineering and manipulating you, is that you will be forced into sexual activity that repulses you. Now, I'm talking about much more risque than, you know, a bit of innocent role playing or using handcuffs or whatever. I'm talking about serious S&M or threesomes or group sex or some other sexual fetish that you find highly offensive. However, their powers of persuasion are such that they can emotionally coerce or even blackmail you into going along with. So, and I've heard these happen as well. I absolutely have. So again, I'm not making this stuff up. So you will do it because either, you know, you're so in love with them and you're afraid of losing them, even though what you're doing is actually you're going to be losing yourself. And you'll come away from each encounter feeling abused, used, guilty, ashamed, dirty. Or you'll do it because you're afraid, because they've threatened that if you don't do this, I'll do that. There's some kind of emotional blackmail going on, which again, you're going to do it because you don't see any other way out. And what happens is the narcissist will use your participation, even though they've coerced or emotionally blackmailed you into doing it, they will use it to further abuse you. So they might threaten to expose you, or they might call you depraved. And remember that they project their inner stuff onto you. So you'll find yourself caught up in this horrible sexual trap that you don't know how to escape. So if any of that's going on, this is mammoth red flag that you need to get out of this relationship. Another thing, I think we're coming towards the end, I think, so many of these that I want to cover briefly, and I have mentioned it very briefly, but sex in public is another thing that, particularly with, you know, the very overt cerebral type narcissists who are very clever and they think they're so above everyone else. They can be extreme exhibitionists and they love the thrill. So they'll often try to force you into having sex in risky or public places. And they're actually excited by the real risk of being seen, and they have no shame about it. And they don't care that it makes you uncomfortable. So if you object, you'll be admonished for being boring, prudish, not adventurous enough for them. And once again, you know, they're going to be instilling the fear of losing them into you, and you'll go against your instincts and you'll comply with them, even though you feel, you know, intensely uncomfortable about it. They'll be getting off on the excitement of the potential exposure in public, but they'll also be getting off on the anguish that you're showing and the fact that they're controlling you to do something you don't want to. That is where, you know, some of the biggest thrills come from for them, is having that control over you and forcing you into doing something really risque like that you don't want to do. I have another one. Another one is that some narcissists consider sex too primitive for them. And this can be the cerebral, which is the highly intellectual narcissist who actually considers sex demeaning, degrading, disgusting, it's beneath them. You know, they consider that their superior intellect puts them way above wanting or needing such primitive carnal desires. Now, if you marry a narcissist like this and, you know, you've agreed that you want to have children together, let's say, the only time you'll have sex is to get you pregnant. It's very unlikely to happen any time or many times outside of that. Another Another behavior that goes on with sex is that they, it's kind of the push-pull, and not in the way you might think I mean. They fire you up, then cool you down. This is a trick they play. So they'll send you, erotic, sexy messages about what they want to do with you when they see you next, and when they get you all hot and bothered at the thought of having some exciting sex. But then when they show up, they'll completely switch off the sex vibe, and this will cause you to wonder why. And you'll think maybe, immediately you'll think you're not looking your best, or you'll think, well, they've gone off me, or they don't fancy you enough. All these things will go through your head. But none of it will be true. None of this will be true that you're thinking about yourself. The truth is, they've deliberately misled you with this blatant sexual teasing and promises, which they know is going to get you excited and worked up, because they know what buttons to push with you. We know that. They know which buttons, so they're pushing these buttons, but they have no intention of delivering on them. So they see your confusion, and if you do make any advances towards them to pick up where, they left off on the sexy vibes, they'll brush you off and you feel rejected. And this is the fuel they are looking for. They want to see you hurt and rejected. They want to know they have this power over you. It's pretty sick. Whichever way you cut it with a narcissist, so much of their behavior is very, very sick. So again, there's another one. And goodness, I have another one to go over. Didn't realize I had so many on this particular one. The next one that is, they want it now. Hypersexual narcissists will want sex frequently, and if you turn them down, they'll get angry or upset with you. Now, they fail to realize that you might be exhausted or not in the mood. They don't care about your feelings, because your job is to be there for them 24/7 and give them whatever they want, whenever they want it, and that applies equally to sex. And often, you'll just get it over with and get them off your case so that you can just get your head down and get some sleep, This is what will happen. You just give in, get on with it, and all the joy goes out of sex. Because there's no connection. It's just that they want it now. You're there, you've got to just basically do it, get on with it. And yeah, there's no joy left in it for you. I have another one. My goodness, this is a long one. So the next one is that you actually love sex, but so the other side of the coin is if you are highly sexed yourself and you really enjoy sex, well, they will have already discovered this about you as soon as you began your sexual relationship. So they will deprive you of it now, because they know it's going to make you suffer. You really cannot win in the sexual stakes with a narcissist. If you love it, they'll deprive you of it. If you hate it, they'll force it on you. So if you consider all of these scenarios, what you'll see is typical narcissistic selfishness gets right down to the core of even this most intimate act between couples. You're never, ever going to have a loving, fulfilling, satisfying sex life with a narcissist. Now, in my book, I share a lot more examples about the reality of sex with a narcissist. I haven't covered it all here because, as you see, it's quite a long section, but there is more in my book. So it's not a pretty place to be. And what you need to, ask yourself is, especially if you've been watching my videos, what do you think my advice is right now? If you've been following my series of videos with me, you'll know. I'm pretty sure. But for the record, I do want to say that no matter how good the sex is in the beginning, during that all-important love bombing stage, it's not going to last, and you're going to end up in a similar or worse situation as the people who've shared all these stories with me and all these examples I've given you. if the sex is lousy to begin with, do you think it's going to get better as it goes along? No, chances are it's not going to. And what I've also said early on is, way back in the beginning of my book, I talk about not having sex on the first dates, the first several times you meet this person, because there are enough red flags before you have sex to realize the person is a narcissist. And if you know those flags, you will already know that person is a narcissist before you make the mistake of getting into bed with them, literally. So you will not have to get involved in any of these ugly narcissistic sex scenarios at all. So that was a long one, but I hope that you found that useful, and do check out the next one coming up, because there's still more red flags that you need to be aware of. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.